The Valkyrie Senate chamber fell silent as Ambassador Sumin Park took her place at the speaking platform, and 3,000 representatives of the conquered Dominion watched her with expressions ranging from hatred to fear to reluctant respect. 1 standard year had passed since the Battle of the Remembrance Line, and in that time the galaxy had watched humanity do something unprecedented. They had won total victory and demanded almost nothing the human fleet maintained positions around Valkyrie core worlds, but made no attempt to govern or exploit or punish. And human administrators helped restore systems damaged during the brief conflict, but claimed no authority over Valkyrie internal affairs. And human ships escorted merchant vessels, but charged no fees and imposed no restrictions. It made no sense to observers accustomed to the brutal logic of interstellar conquest. And speculation ran wild through neutral space about what humanity truly wanted. Ambassador Park cleared her throat softly, and the chamber's attention focused on her. Completely. 1 year ago, your military attacked our colony of New Caledonia without provocation, she began. And you did this because you believed humanity had grown weak and complacent and incapable of defending ourselves. Murmurs of discomfort rippled through the assembled senators. This belief was understandable, she continued, because for 10,000 years we showed you exactly what you expected to see, and we told you exactly what you wanted to hear, and we let you convince yourselves that the sacred truce represented your triumph rather than our choice. Her voice carried no anger, only the patient tone of a teacher explaining something important. What you did not understand is that humanity never stopped being dangerous. And we never forgot what your ancestors did during the First War. And we never stopped preparing for the day when your descendants might repeat those mistakes. She paused and let silence emphasize her words. We spent 10 millennia building a civilization that valued creation over destruction, and cooperation over conquest, and wisdom over strength. And we did this genuinely because we believed it was better. And we did not pretend or deceive ourselves about what we were becoming. Her eyes swept the chamber. But we also maintained our capability because we remembered that not every species shares our values. And we understood that true peace requires the strength to enforce it against those who would choose violence. High Coordinator Sultan Jamin Vex rose from his seat with barely contained frustration. Then why show mercy? He demanded. You had complete victory, and you could have done anything to us, so why hold back? Ambassador Park smiled that familiar human smile, because mercy is not weakness. Coordinator, and choosing not to destroy those you could easily destroy is not softness. And offering second chances to those who do not deserve them is not foolishness. She clasped her hands before her. Humanity learned these lessons through millennia of painful experience. And we chose the sacred truce not because we feared losing the war, but because we feared what winning would cost us. Her voice dropped to something softer. Total victory would have required us to commit atrocities that violated everything we wanted to be. And we decided that preserving our souls was more important than proving our strength. And we have never regretted that choice, even when it allowed you to believe we had grown weak. The chamber remained utterly silent. Today you face the same choice our ancestors faced 10,000 years ago. Ambassador Park continued. You can cling to your pride and your anger and your dreams of vengeance. Or you can accept that the universe offers something better than eternal cycles of violence. She gestured toward the massive windows where human warships were visible as distant points of light. Those ships will remain for as long as necessary. But we hope that necessity will be measured in years rather than centuries. And we hope that your children will grow up in a galaxy where strength is used to protect rather than dominate. High Coordinator Vex stared at her for a long moment before asking the question that had clearly tormented him for months. Will you ever truly forgive us? Ambassador Park's smile shifted to something more genuine. Ask us in another 10,000 years, she replied. We will still remember everything, but we might choose to say yes. 1 year after that speech, former Battlemaster G1 Kethari stood on the observation deck of a joint peacekeeping vessel and watched stars drift past the viewport with emotions she could not quite name. Her uniform now bore insignia combining human and Valkyrie symbols, marking her as a liaison officer in the new cooperative fleet that patrolled neutral space. And her commanding officer was a human captain named Sungho Chun, who treated her with respect she was not entirely sure she deserved. You seem thoughtful tonight, Captain Chun observed as he joined her at the viewport. I am remembering, she admitted. The day I interrogated that teacher on Haven's Rest. He told me that humans have excellent memories and very long patience. And I did not understand what he meant until recently. The captain nodded slowly. What do you understand now? Kethari turned to face him with an expression of genuine humility. That your species chose to be peaceful. And that choice required more strength than any war we could have fought. And that we mistook your restraint for weakness because we could not imagine choosing restraint ourselves. She paused, and her voice dropped. Will humanity ever truly forgive my people, Captain? Sungho Chun smiled that distinctly human smile and considered the question with obvious care. We remember everything, he said finally. Every atrocity from the first war and every life lost in this one and every moment of fear our civilians felt under occupation. His eyes met hers with calm certainty. But remembering is not the same as holding grudges. And we have learned that carrying hatred across generations poisons the one who carries it more than the one it targets. He looked out at the stars. So yes, I believe humanity will forgive, not because you deserve it, but because we choose to be the species that offers second chances, even to those who would never offer them to us. Kethari felt something shift in her chest that might have been hope. That seems like a difficult way to live. It is, Captain Chun agreed. But the alternative is becoming the thing we fought against. And we decided long ago that our souls were worth more than our pride. Across the galaxy, species that had watched the conflict updated their diplomatic protocols with new classifications for humanity. The files carried headers that would be quoted in academic texts and political speeches and cautionary tales for generations to come. Humanity, do not provoke. They remember everything. They prepare for centuries. They wait with infinite patience. And when you expect vengeance, they offer mercy instead. And at the very bottom, in smaller text that somehow carried more weight than all the warnings above it. This makes them far more dangerous than any species that simply seeks revenge on Earth. In the quiet garden surrounding the memorial of the long peace, children played beneath trees that had witnessed 10,000 years of human history. Their laughter echoed across lawns where monuments listed the names of every life lost in both wars. And their games carried them past statues of admirals and ambassadors and ordinary citizens who had carried the sacred trust across 100 centuries. An elderly woman sat on a bench watching them with a gentle smile. And when a young girl approached to ask what the strange symbols on the monuments meant, she gathered the child onto her lap and began to explain. Long ago, our people made a choice, she said softly. And every generation since has made that same choice again, not because it was easy, but because it was right. The child looked up at her with curious eyes. What choice, grandmother? The old woman smiled that distinctly human smile. To remember everything and forgive anyway, she answered. To be strong enough to destroy and wise enough not to. And to believe that even those who hurt us can learn to be better if we give them the chance. She hugged the child close. That is what it means to be human. Little one, and as long as we keep making that choice, the peace will hold. Above them, the sky stretched endless and full of stars. And somewhere out there among those distant lights, a galaxy that had once feared humanity was slowly learning to trust them instead. And humanity remembered everything, but they chose to smile anyway. The Battle of the Remembrance Line began and ended in the span of 17 minutes. And in that brief window of violence, the galaxy learned why humanity had been feared before the Truce Admiral Min Jun. Reyes gave the order with quiet precision, and her fleet moved as a single organism. 300,000 ships executing maneuvers that the Valkyrie tactical computers could not even track, let alone counter. The first wave of human vessels did not fire weapons. Instead, they projected fields of shimmering energy that swept across the Valkyrie formation like waves washing over sand. And wherever those fields touched, Valkyrie systems simply stopped working. Shields flickered and died without dramatic explosions. And weapon systems locked into safe mode without possibility of override. An engine sputtered and went silent, leaving ships drifting helplessly in the void. Report. Supreme Admiral Yun Seok. Thalvex demanded as his bridge lights flickered and half his displays went dark. Unknown weapon effect. His tactical officer replied with barely controlled panic. Our systems are being selectively disabled at the molecular level, and we cannot determine the mechanism. Return fire. We cannot. Supreme Admiral. Our weapons are completely non-functional. The human fleet continued its systematic work with terrifying efficiency, moving through the Valkyrie armada, like surgeons performing delicate operations rather than warriors fighting a battle. Ship after ship fell silent, their crews alive and unharmed, but completely unable to affect their fate. And within minutes, the mighty Valkyrie war machine had become nothing more than 50,000 pieces of drifting debris. Battlemaster G1 Cathari managed to restore partial communications on her vessel and immediately opened a channel to the human flagship. Why? Do you not finish us? She demanded, her pride wounded more deeply than any physical injury could have managed. Admiral Reyes appeared on the damaged screen with an expression that might have been pity. Because this is not about revenge, she replied. This is about education. Education? You attacked our worlds because you believed we had grown weak, the Admiral explained. And you believe this because you spent 10,000 years convincing yourselves that the truce represented your victory rather than your salvation. Cathari felt her scales flush with shame and anger. The histories clearly state, your histories are propaganda written by leaders who needed to justify accepting peace terms they found humiliating. Admiral Reyes interrupted. The truth is that humanity could have won that war, but chose not to because we did not want to commit the atrocities that total victory would have required. She leaned forward with intensity that made Cathari instinctively recoil. We could have glassed your homeworld and sterilized your colonies and hunted your refugees across the galaxy until none remained. And we had the capability and the opportunity, and we chose mercy instead. Her voice softened slightly. Today we are choosing mercy again, Battlemaster. And I strongly suggest you learn from the experience. The human fleet bypassed the disabled Valkyrie armada entirely and set course for the Dominion's core systems, leaving 50,000 helpless warships floating in the darkness as testament to human restraint. Supreme Admiral Yun Seok Thalvex watched them go and understood finally what he was truly facing, not an enemy seeking vengeance or conquest or destruction, but a civilization demonstrating capability with the implicit promise that next time the demonstration might not be so gentle. The journey to the Valkyrie homeworld took 3 standard days, and in that time the human fleet encountered 17 additional defensive formations totaling another 100,000 ships. Each engagement ended the same way: human vessels would advance in patterns that seemed chaotic until they suddenly locked into perfect synchronization, and those shimmering fields would sweep across Valkyrie positions, and ships would go silent without a single casualty on either side. The Dominion's entire military might drifted helpless in the void while humanity's armada continued its inexorable advance. When they finally arrived at Valkyrie Prime, the homeworld's orbital defenses opened fire with everything. They had particle beams and plasma, torpedoes and kinetic projectiles, and exotic weapons that represented the absolute pinnacle of Valkyrie military technology, all concentrated on the human fleet in a desperate attempt to stop what could not be stopped. The human shields did not flicker. Admiral Reyes did not even order evasive maneuvers as her fleet absorbed firepower that should have vaporized a small moon, and the defensive installations exhausted their ammunition while the human vessels maintained perfect formation above the planet's largest continent. Planetary defense grid depleted, her tactical officer reported calmly. No human casualties. Open a channel to the surface. The face of Valkyrie High Coordinator Sultan Jamin Vex appeared on screen, his scales pale with terror and his four hands trembling visibly. What do you want? He demanded, his voice breaking on the words, a conversation. Admiral Reyes replied, my diplomatic representative is descending to your capital now, and I suggest you receive her with appropriate courtesy. A single shuttle detached from the flagship and dropped through the atmosphere with deliberate slowness, giving the Valkyrie population time to see it coming, time to understand that their defenses could not stop it, time to recognize their complete helplessness. Ambassador Sumin Park descended the shuttle's ramp alone and unarmed, her silver hair stirring in the alien breeze as she walked across the landing platform toward the assembled Valkyrie leadership guards, surrounded her with weapons drawn, but did not fire because their orders had been very clear and because everyone present understood that killing this one old woman would accomplish nothing except ensuring humanity's response would be far less gentle. Coordinator Vex, she greeted him with a formal bow. Thank you for receiving me. You have conquered us, he replied bitterly. What choice did we have? Ambassador Park smiled that familiar human smile and shook her head slowly. We have not conquered you, she corrected. We have demonstrated what we could do if we chose to pursue conquest. And now we are here to discuss why we are choosing differently. The Valkyrie leadership exchanged confused glances. You came with 300,000 warships to talk? We came with 300,000 warships to ensure you would listen, she clarified. There is a difference. She clasped her hands before her and spoke with the patient authority of someone who held absolute power and chose not to use it. 10,000 years ago, your ancestors attacked humanity because they believed we were weak. And today, your generation has repeated that mistake. And now you stand where they stood, facing the same choice they faced. Her eyes swept across the assembled Valkyrie with an expression that contained both steel and compassion. You can accept that humanity chooses peace, not because we are unable to wage war, but because we prefer building to destroying. Or you can cling to your pride and force us to prove our capability in ways that neither of our species would enjoy. Coordinator Vex found his voice after a long moment. And if we choose peace, what then? Ambassador Park's smile warmed slightly. Then we teach you what we learned 10,000 years ago, she answered. That true strength is not measured by the ability to destroy, but by the wisdom to refrain from destruction. She paused and let silence emphasize her next words. We remember everything you did during the war, and everything you have done in the weeks since it resumed. And we will never forget, but we are prepared to forgive if you demonstrate genuine change. The coordinator looked up at the sky where human warships hung in patient formation. Weapons that could level his entire civilization, held in check by nothing more than human choice. And if we do not change, then we will wait, Ambassador Park replied. Humanity is very patient, coordinator, and we have excellent memories. And eventually, you or your descendants will give us reason to stop choosing restraint." Her smile vanished entirely. "I strongly recommend you do not test that patience again." The neutral station of Axis Prime had become a gathering point for observers from across the galaxy, and species that normally avoided each other crowded together in viewing lounges to watch the conflict unfold on massive display screens. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when the humans finally broke Trade Representative Velshik of the Moth Collective pressed against the observation window with compound eyes fixed on the data streams, and her wings rustled with anticipation that bordered on morbid curiosity. The Volcari now control 31 human systems, she murmured to her companion, a silicon-based being from the deep core who communicated through vibrations in the floor. And yet the humans continue smiling. Her companion observed, its crystalline form pulsing with confusion. "I have studied organic behavior for 3 centuries, and I cannot explain this response to existential threat." Similar conversations echoed throughout the station as analysts and diplomats and curious civilians tried to make sense of what they were witnessing. Humanity was losing the war by every measurable standard. Their colonies fell one after another without significant resistance, and their civilian populations accepted occupation with calm cooperation. And their remaining military forces seemed to have simply vanished rather than mounting any defense. Yet every report from occupied territories contained the same unsettling detail. The humans did not act like a conquered people. They went about their daily lives with quiet purpose, and they helped their Velcari occupiers navigate unfamiliar systems, and they answered questions politely and thoroughly. And underneath it all they smiled, those strange knowing smiles that made even hardened soldiers uncomfortable. Battlemaster G1 Cathari stood in an interrogation chamber on the occupied world of Haven's Rest, studying the human prisoner across from her with growing frustration. The man was a former teacher named Dong Hyun Kim, who had been detained for possessing historical military texts that the Occupation Authority had classified as contraband. And he sat in his restraints with the same infuriating calm that every human seemed to possess. "You will explain the location of your military forces," Cathari demanded for the 3rd time. "I already told you," Dong Hyun replied with a patient smile. "I am a history teacher, and I have no knowledge of military deployments. You possessed restricted materials describing weapon systems and tactical formations." "Historical materials," he corrected gently. "I teach the period of the first expansion, and my students need primary sources to understand how our ancestors lived and fought." Cathari slammed her upper fists against the table hard enough to dent the metal surface. "Your species is being conquered, and you sit there discussing educational methodology as if this were a faculty meeting," she snarled. "Do you not understand what is happening?" The teacher's smile widened slightly. "I understand perfectly, Battlemaster," he assured her. "The question is whether you do. Explain." Dong Hyun leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed, and his voice dropped to a conversational tone that somehow made his words more disturbing. "You believe you are conquering a civilization that has forgotten how to fight. But you are actually fighting a civilization that has been waiting for you to attack for 10,000 years. Cathari felt her scales tighten with involuntary unease. "Your species abandoned military capability generations ago," she countered. "Our intelligence is thorough and accurate." "Your intelligence saw exactly what we wanted you to see," the teacher replied. "Every culture has stories, Battlemaster, and humans are very good at telling stories that other species want to believe." He gestured around the interrogation chamber with bound hands. "You wanted to believe we had grown weak because it justified your aggression. So we showed you weakness, and you wanted to believe our military existed only in museums. So we put our military in museums, and you wanted to believe the war would be easy. So we made it easy. You are claiming this was all deliberate deception. I am claiming that humans have excellent memories and very long patience. Dong Haiyan corrected. And I am also claiming that you might want to check the coordinates your fleet received 3 weeks ago. Cathari felt cold certainty settle into her stomach. How do you know about that transmission? Everyone knows, the teacher said with that maddening smile. Every human in occupied space knows. The date and the location and what is going to happen when your fleet arrives. And what is going to happen? Dong Haiyan Kim laughed softly, the same warm laugh that had echoed from Governor Reyes on the day of the attack. You gave us purpose again, he said. You ended 10,000 years of peaceful boredom and gave every human alive a reason to remember why our ancestors were feared across the galaxy. His eyes met hers with absolute certainty. You have no idea how boring peace is for a species that evolved as persistence predators. Battlemaster. And you have no idea how grateful we are that you finally gave us permission to stop pretending. The Valkyrie Armada gathered at the coordinates specified in the human transmission. 50,000 warships representing the full military might of the Dominion arranged in battle. Formation against the empty darkness of Interstellar Space Supreme Admiral Yun Seok Thelvex stood on his bridge and waited for whatever trick the humans had planned, confident that his overwhelming numbers would prove sufficient against any surprise. Sensors detect fold space emergence, his tactical officer reported. Single point source bearing 005. One ship? Battlemaster Cathari asked, her voice carrying relief. They sent one ship? The human vessel emerged from fold space and immediately broadcast an open channel message that every ship in the Valkyrie fleet received simultaneously. Admiral Minjun Reyes appeared on screen with calm authority, her uniform bearing insignia that no Valkyrie had seen in 10 millennia. Supreme Admiral, she said with professional courtesy. I am here to inform you that you are now outnumbered. Cathari laughed harshly. You bring one ship against 50,000 and claim we are outnumbered. I said you are outnumbered, Admiral Reyes repeated. I did not say by my ship. Space rippled behind her vessel as fold space signatures, multiplied beyond the sensor's ability to count. And 10,000 warships merged in perfect formation around the lone human vessel. These are the ships we kept polished, the Admiral continued. The ones we maintained for commemorative exercises and historical education. More signatures appeared on the Valkyrie sensors, and more. And more. The others needed a few months to shake off the dust. The Supreme Admiral watched in mounting horror as additional fleets emerged from every direction. Each wave larger than the last, ships of designs that span 10,000 years of technological development, appearing in numbers that should have been impossible. How many? He whispered. His tactical officer's voice trembled as she answered, 300,000 and still climbing. Supreme Admiral. Admiral Reyes smiled that distinctly human smile. We have been building and storing ships since the day the truce was signed, she explained. And we have been training crews in secret for 100 centuries. And we have been improving our technology while your dominion stagnated in the certainty of your own superiority. Her smile vanished and her voice turned cold. Now then, shall we discuss terms or would you prefer a demonstration? The Supreme Admiral looked at the tactical display showing his fleet surrounded by an armada 6 times his own size. Ships that hummed with power signatures his sensors could barely classify. Crewed by humans who had finally been given permission to stop pretending, demonstrate, he said, because he needed to understand exactly what he was facing. Admiral Reyes nodded once. As you wish. The Galactic Assembly convened an emergency session within hours of the attack, and representatives from 300 species crowded into the great chamber on Axis Prime to debate the crisis that threatened 10 millennia of interstellar stability. Speaker Tolvin of the Kreth Collective called the session to order with mounting anxiety visible in the way her crystalline form flickered between colors of distress. The Velkari Dominion has violated the sacred truce, she announced, and we gather to determine what response the Assembly will take to restore peace between our member civilizations. Murmurs rippled through the chamber because everyone present understood the gravity of the situation, and everyone present also believed they understood how it would end. Humanity would negotiate, humanity would make concessions, humanity would accept mediation and compromise and eventually sign a new treaty that gave the Velkari whatever they wanted in exchange for stopping the violence. This was what soft species did when hard species attacked them. And this was what humanity had become after 10,000 years without conflict. And this was simply the natural order of galactic politics. Ambassador Sumin Park rose from the human delegation's platform, and every eye turned toward her small figure with expressions ranging from pity to condescension. She was an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes and a gentle smile that seemed to confirm every assumption about human weakness. And several delegates prepared their most sympathetic expressions for the surrender speech they expected to hear. Honored members of the Assembly, she began in a voice as soft as her appearance suggested it would be, I thank you for your concern regarding the unprovoked attack on our colony world of New Caledonia. Tolvin leaned forward with colors shifting to diplomatic green. The Assembly stands ready to facilitate negotiations between humanity and the Velkari Dominion, and I am authorized to offer our full mediation services to bring this unfortunate conflict to a swift and peaceful resolution. That will not be necessary, Ambassador Park replied, and something in her tone made several nearby delegates flinch without understanding why. I beg your pardon? Humanity respectfully declines all offers of mediation, the ambassador clarified with that same gentle smile. We will handle this matter ourselves. Shocked silence filled the chamber, because no species had ever declined assembly mediation, and no species had ever shown such calm confidence when facing a military power like the Velkari Dominion, and no species had ever smiled quite like Sumin Park was smiling now. The Velkari ambassador rose from his platform with indignation darkening his scales. You refuse mediation because you have nothing to negotiate with, he declared triumphantly. Your species has forgotten how to fight, and your military exists only in museums, and your threats are nothing but the desperate bluster of a dying civilization. Ambassador Park turned to face him directly, and her smile never wavered. I wonder, she said quietly, if you have ever asked yourself why humanity agreed to the sacred truce in the first place. The question caught the Velkari representative off guard. Because you were losing the war, he answered after a moment. Our ancestors had pushed your forces back to a dozen systems, and total victory was merely a matter of time. Is that what your history books say? The ambassador's tone carried something that made the chamber grow even more quiet, and several species with acute emotional perception began edging toward the exits. What other explanation could there be? The Velkari demanded Sumin. Park clasped her hands before her and spoke in the patient voice of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. The war ended because humanity chose to stop fighting, not because we could not continue, she explained. We looked at what we had become and what we were doing, and we decided that we did not want to be that species anymore. Convenient revisionism. Perhaps, she acknowledged. But consider this. In the 10,000 years since the truce was signed, what has humanity actually been doing? The question seemed rhetorical, but she waited for an answer that never came. We built universities on every world and taught our children history with an emphasis they did not quite understand. She continued, We established cultural preservation societies that maintained skills and knowledge that seemed obsolete, but never quite disappeared from our curriculum. Her smile shifted into something sharper. We created what we called the Memorial Fleet Program, where our most talented engineers designed and built warships as historical reproductions, testing them to ensure authenticity, crewing them with enthusiasts who wanted to experience what their ancestors experienced. The chamber had grown utterly still. We held commemorative exercises where these reproduction fleets practiced historical battle formations. And we maintained archaeological research stations, where weapons technology was studied and preserved, and occasionally improved upon for academic purposes. The Valkyrie ambassador had gone pale beneath his scales. "We did not forget how to fight," Ambassador Park said softly. "We simply chose not to fight because we discovered that building civilizations was more satisfying than destroying them, and creating art was more fulfilling than creating corpses. And teaching children was more meaningful than training soldiers." She paused and let her words sink in. "But we always knew this day might come because we remembered what you did during the war. And we remembered what you threatened to do if we did not accept your terms. And we remembered every atrocity and every massacre and every burned world." Her voice remained gentle, but her eyes had turned to ice. "Humanity has an excellent memory, Ambassador. And we have been preparing for this moment since the day the truce was signed. Deep beneath Luna's surface in chambers that official records listed as empty storage facilities. Admiral Min Jun." Reyes walked through endless rows of warships that gleamed under lights that had not shone for 100 centuries. Her family had served in the Memorial Fleet for 347 generations, passing the duty from parent to child like a sacred trust. And she had trained her entire life for a command that she had secretly hoped would never come. But it had come, and she was ready. And so were the millions of crew members emerging from their civilian lives to take their long-rehearsed positions status report. She commanded, her voice echoing in the vast hangar. "All vessels in Section Luna Prime are operational," her executive officer reported. "Crews are arriving at projected rates and should reach full complement within 72 hours. The other sections? Similar reports from Mars Deep, Europa Station, Titan Reserve, and all 37 distributed vault locations," he confirmed. "Total initial deployment capacity stands at 10,000 combat-ready vessels." Admiral Reyes nodded and felt the weight of history settling onto her shoulders. "And the secondary reserves?" Her executive officer smiled in a way that reminded her of Ambassador Park's expression in the assembly chambers still being inventoried. "Admiral, but preliminary estimates suggest we will exceed initial projections by a significant margin across the galaxy." The Valkyrie intercepted a transmission that their intelligence officers initially dismissed as a translation error because surely the content could not be correct. The message contained coordinates to an empty region of space far from any strategic target, along with a date 3 standard weeks in the future and 3 words that made no sense in the context of military communication. "We remember everything. Supreme Admiral Yunseok." Thalvex read the message 17 times and felt his certainty crumbling with each repetition. "It is a trap," Battlemaster Cathari insisted. "They want us to divide our forces chasing phantoms while they mount some desperate last defense." "Perhaps," the Supreme Admiral replied. But his voice carried no conviction. What else could it be? He looked at the coordinates and the date and the 3 simple words. And he remembered the governor's laughter and the ambassador's smile and the strange calm that every human seemed to display in the face of what should have been devastating defeat. "I do not." "No," he admitted quietly. "And that terrifies me more than anything else." The Valkyrie war machine continued its advance across human space, meeting minimal resistance at every turn. And victory followed victory until the Dominion controlled nearly a quarter of humanity's territory. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like walking into a trap that had not yet been sprung. The first missiles struck New Caledonia at dawn when the twin suns painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Supreme Admiral Yunseok Thalvex watched from the bridge of his flagship as 3 orbital stations erupted into brilliant flowers of flame and debris, and he allowed himself a thin smile of satisfaction. The 10,000 years of waiting had finally come to an end. The Valkyrie Dominion had grown tired of peace. "Target the coastal cities next," he commanded. His 4 arms folded behind his back, as sensor data streamed across the tactical displays surrounding him. Battlemaster G1 Kethari nodded and relayed the orders, her silver scales catching the light from the explosions blooming across the planet below. And within minutes, 2 major population centers vanished beneath curtains of fire that could be seen from orbit. The bridge crew worked in focused silence, executing the attack plan they had rehearsed in secret for 3 centuries. And not one of them felt guilt for what they did, because they believed absolutely in the righteousness of their cause. Humanity had grown weak. Every intelligence report confirmed this truth that the Valkyrie High Command had suspected for millennia, and the evidence seemed overwhelming to anyone who cared to look at what humans had become. They wrote poetry now instead of battle hymns, and they painted pictures instead of planning campaigns, and they debated philosophy instead of strategy, and they celebrated artists instead of warriors. Their military academies had become museums where children took field trips to learn about the barbaric past that humanity had supposedly transcended, and their weapons factories had converted to producing musical instruments and cooking equipment and luxury goods. The humans had convinced themselves that war was a disease they had cured forever, and they had let their guard down so completely that the Valkyrie strike fleet had crossed the border without triggering a single alarm. "Incoming transmission from the planetary surface," announced the communications officer, her voice carrying a note of confusion that made the Supreme Admiral turn toward her station. "Put it through," he ordered, expecting to hear screaming or pleading or desperate calls for mercy that he would magnanimously ignore instead. He heard laughter. The sound filled the bridge, and every Valkyrie present went still, because this was not the hysterical laughter of minds broken by trauma. And this was not the bitter laughter of those who had lost everything. This was genuine amusement. Warm and rich and completely inexplicable, Governor Hajun Reyes appeared on the main view screen with smoke rising behind him and emergency sirens wailing in the distance. And despite the destruction of his world, he stood perfectly calm with a smile playing across his weathered features. "Supreme Admiral," he said, and his voice carried no fear at all. "I must thank you on behalf of my species for providing us with the most entertainment we have experienced in quite some time." Yunseok Thalvex felt his scales ripple with unease that he refused to show on his face. "You thank me for destroying your cities and killing your people," he replied flatly, searching the human's expression for signs of madness and finding none. "Oh, we grieve for our dead, and we will honor them properly," the governor assured him. "But you must understand that you have given humanity something precious today, something we have desperately missed for 10,000 long and peaceful years." "And what is that?" "Purpose," Hajun Reyes answered, and his smile widened into something that made several bridge officers take involuntary steps backward. "You have no idea what you just woke up." The transmission ended, and silence hung over the bridge like a physical weight until Battlemaster Kethari spoke. "He is bluffing," she declared with more confidence than she felt. "The humans have nothing left to wake, and their threats are empty words meant to discourage our advance." The Supreme Admiral nodded slowly and pushed his unease aside because logic supported his Battlemaster's assessment. And 10,000 years of intelligence gathering could not be wrong. And one strange human's calm demeanor meant nothing against the overwhelming evidence of human decline. "Continue the operation," he commanded. "Secure the orbital lanes and prepare ground forces for deployment." His officers obeyed with renewed vigor, and the attack proceeded exactly according to plan. And within hours, New Caledonia fell completely under Valkyrie control, while resistance proved so minimal that many soldiers complained about the lack of challenge. Reports flooded in from across the conquered territory, and each one reinforced the narrative that humanity had indeed grown soft. Beyond recovery, human civilians did not fight back with hidden weapons or desperate courage, and human emergency services focused entirely on rescue operations rather than guerrilla resistance. And human leaders surrendered their facilities without demanding terms or issuing threats. Everything suggested total and complete victory, yet something nagged at Yunsiok Thalvex as he reviewed the casualty reports and occupation summaries. Something he could not quite identify until a junior analyst brought an observation to his attention. "Supreme Admiral," the young officer said hesitantly, "I have noticed an anomaly in civilian behavior that I cannot explain." "Proceed." "The humans are not panicking," the analyst reported. "They are sad, and they are grieving, and they are caring for their wounded. But underneath all of that, they seem almost—" She paused, as if doubting her own analysis. "Relieved." The word hung in the air, and the Supreme Admiral felt that unease returned tenfold. "Relieved," he repeated. "Yes, sir. And many of them are smiling when they think no one is watching. And some have been heard saying things like, 'Finally,' and 'It is about time.' And grandmother always said this day would come." Battlemaster Keth Ari dismissed the report with a wave of her upper arms. "Shock," she declared. "Humans process trauma in strange ways, and we should not read meaning into the irrational behavior of a conquered people." The Supreme Admiral wanted to believe her, and he almost convinced himself to do so. But then a priority alert flashed across every screen on the bridge, and a message arrived from Valkyrie border monitoring stations. "Unknown energy signatures detected," the automated system reported. "Source located beneath planetary surface of Earth. Sol system, magnitude exceeds all known parameters. Classification impossible." Yunsiok Thalvex stared at the data and felt something he had not experienced in 300 years of military service. Fear across the galaxy on a world called Earth that most species considered a quaint historical curiosity rather than a threat. Massive doors that had remained sealed since before the Valkyrie Dominion even existed began to open for the first time in 10 millennia, deep beneath mountains and oceans and deserts. In vaults that official records claimed held nothing but archaeological artifacts and cultural preservation archives. Ancient systems powered up one by one, as automated voices announced activation sequences in languages that predated faster than light travel. Lights flickered on in endless underground hangars to reveal shapes covered in dust and preservation film. Shapes that gleamed with deadly purpose when maintenance drones began their long-delayed cleaning cycles and across 1,000 human worlds. People stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky with expressions that ranged from grim determination to barely contained excitement. The message spread through channels that had waited impatient readiness for 100 centuries, passed from generation to generation like a sacred trust that none had ever forgotten or neglected. The words were simple, and every human knew them by heart. The truce is broken, and the vaults are open, and the long watch has finally ended. Humanity remembered everything, and now the galaxy would learn why that was terrifying.